My name is Daniel Mercer, and I accepted employment at a research station so remote that the nearest road ended more than 70 miles away. I took the position for reasons both practical and personal. The stipend promised was generous, and I was at a stage in my life where isolation seemed like a cure rather than a punishment. I had been working in mid-level laboratory posts for years, always under the shadows of senior scientists, always in windowless rooms recycling stale air. When the opportunity appeared in the form of a short, almost cryptic job posting, I convinced myself it was fate. The advert promised independent technical oversight of a field station requiring minimal supervision and maximum discretion. That combination of words intrigued me. I imagined a rustic cabin, snow-covered pines, and a sky filled with stars instead of neon lights. I did not imagine the logs I would later uncover, logs filled with accounts that chilled me in ways no clinical textbook on pathology or physiology ever had. The hiring process was curiously easy. I submitted a resume and a short letter of intent, and within 2 weeks, I received a sealed envelope by courier. Inside were papers that resembled contracts, but without company insignias, only legal jargon about non-disclosure, forfeiture of claims, and mandatory completion of a 3-month term. A second envelope contained a one-way plane ticket to Anchorage, Alaska, along with a note written in stiff block letter. Pack cold weather gear. You will be retrieved. No signature, no letterhead. I should have balked then, but something in me wanted to be swallowed by the unknown. From Anchorage, a twin-engine plane carried me over ranges of mountains that looked less like geography and more like teeth breaking through ice. Hours later, we landed on a crude strip carved from tundra. There, 2 men in heavy parkas greeted me with clipped nods and loaded my duffel into a snowcat. They never offered names, nor did they answer questions beyond monosyllables. We traveled across a white void that dissolved horizon from sky until at last structures emerged, low buildings half buried in snowdrifts, their metal siding dulled by constant wind. This was the station, my station now. Inside, the air carried a smell of machine oil, melted frost, and something faintly metallic. The main corridor led to a central hub with doors branching to laboratories, sleeping quarters, and storage. The men who escorted me offered no tour. One pressed a keycard into my palm. Another pointed toward a door marked Technician Quarters, and then they departed without ceremony, the snowcat fading back into the emptiness. I was alone. For 2 days I occupied myself with ordinary acclamation. The power grid hummed reliably, fed by buried cables stretching to who knows where. Water cycled from tanks and filters. Food supplies, mostly freeze, dried packets and canned goods, were stocked to abundance. I inventoried equipment, checked logs on the computers, and settled into the rhythm of a caretaker. At night, the wind thrashed against metal siding, creating the impression of claws dragging across the walls. I told myself it was only the storm. On the third evening, while exploring storage, I discovered a door I had not noticed before. Unlike others, it bore no label, only a keypad lock smeared with frost. I pressed numbers at random. To my surprise, the panel flashed green and clicked open, as if security were no longer a priority. The room beyond was warmer than the rest, lined with file cabinets, and a single terminal glowing with residual power. Across a desk lay a binder marked, Final Logs, Do Not Alter. My breath caught because the word final suggested endings, and endings meant abandonment or worse. I carried the binder to my quarters, heart hammering with a curiosity I could not resist. The first entries were dated 18 months earlier. Handwriting varied, sometimes neat, sometimes trembling, but the names repeated: Dr. Whitaker, Dr. Han, Dr. Petrov, and others. Their notes began as mundane observations of weather, equipment calibration, and wildlife surveys. Yet, as I turned pages, the tone shifted. By the second week of entries, sentences fragmented into desperate scrawls, and words like shadows, voices, and not alone appeared. I read until dawn, my skin crawling, every creak of the station magnified into threat. Whittaker wrote, "Something moves outside the perimeter, not caribou, not bear. The floodlights catch silhouettes, but the snow swallows tracks. We are unanimous in our fear." Han added label. "The wind is speaking." I recorded frequencies. They match no meteorological pattern. When slowed, the sound becomes language, though in no tongue I know. We are not meant to hear it. Petrov's final note before his handwriting dissolved into frantic loops. We do not trust the glass. Reflections linger longer than we move. Yesterday, I watched myself still standing in the window after I had stepped away. I closed the binder, trembling. It could have been a collective psychosis. Stress from isolation compounded by endless dark. Scientists were human, after all, and even data-driven minds could fracture under pressure. But the way the entries grew jagged and ended mid-sentence without closure disturbed me profoundly. What had become of them? Where were they now? Over the following days, I attempted to reconcile the logs with reality. The laboratories stood abandoned, equipment still humming, vials labeled with dates but no conclusions. Personal effects remained in the sleeping quarters, books with folded spines, rugs stained with coffee, coats hung neatly as though expecting their owner's return. Yet no bodies, no signs of evacuation, only absence. The silence pressed heavier each night. One evening, while pacing the main corridor, I noticed condensation forming on a window pane despite the sealed insulation. I leaned closer, my own reflection dim in the glass. For an instant, I swore the reflection smiled when I did not. I staggered back, pulse racing, and forced myself to laugh it away. Sleep deprivation, suggestibility after reading those logs. Still, I covered the window with a blanket before bed. On the seventh day, I heard the first knock. It came faintly, like someone rapping on metal from beneath the floor. I froze, listening. 3 measured taps. Silence. Then again, from the far side of the wall. I followed the sound into a storage bay, but when I entered, the knocking ceased. Only the hum of generators remained. I waited, breath steaming in the cold air, until the silence became unbearable. Back in my quarters, I opened the binder again, desperate for explanation. Near the end, Whittaker had written Knox Travel. First below, then above, then inside. When you answer, it learns your rhythm. I set the binder down with shaking hands. Had my rhythm already been learned, sleep eluded me. The station seemed alive, every groan of metal and rush of wind conspiring to keep me awake. Around 3 a.m., I rose to fetch water. In the corridor, I glimpsed a figure at the far end. Tall, indistinct, barely more than a silhouette. I called out, "Hello." My voice echoed unnaturally, as though swallowed by unseen walls. The figure did not respond. I advanced 2 steps, and the lights flickered. When they steadied, the corridor was empty. I backed into my room, bolted the door, and remained awake until morning bled gray across the snowfields outside. By the end of my first week, dread had seeped into every routine. Eating, sleeping, even checking the generator panels felt like trespassing in a place that did not want me. Yet I could not leave. The snowcat would not return for weeks, and radio contact remained patchy, filled with bursts of static that almost resembled whispering voices. I began to wonder if this was intentional, if my employers had sent me not to maintain the station, but to inherit whatever had consumed the last team. That suspicion deepened when I discovered the second binder. It was hidden behind ceiling tiles in the technician's office, wrapped in wax paper as though to protect it from moisture. Unlike the first, this one bore no label. Its entries were shorter, more frantic, and written in red ink that had bled through the pages. The handwriting was unsteady, almost childlike at times. One entry burned into my mind. It waits in the glass. Do not look too long. The longer you look, the more it sees you. We covered every mirror. Do the same? I dropped the binder, breath ragged. My quarters contained a small mirror above the sink. I rushed there, tore it from the wall, and shoved it face down beneath my mattress. Still, I could not shake the sense that I was already seen. As days passed, small anomalies multiplied. Food tins shifted places between meals. Lights flickered in patterns resembling Morse code. Once, waking from a shallow doze, I found the binder open beside my bed, though I had locked it away. The entry displayed Reaple. You are the last log now. At first, I blamed myself, sleepwalking, stress, paranoia. Yet I could not explain how the locks disengaged, or why the pages turned precisely to that sentence. By the 10th night, the knocking returned, louder from within the ventilation shafts. I pressed my ear to a grate and nearly screamed. The sound was not knocking at all, but breathing, drawn out and heavy. When I backed away, condensation bloomed across the grate, as though something warm exhaled behind it. I sealed the vent with tape and blankets, though I knew such measures were useless against what I did not understand. Still, I endured, cataloging every anomaly, every whisper of sound. A part of me remained scientist enough to document, though I suspected these would become the next, final logs. And through it all, one thought gnawed at me. I was not merely reading history, I was repeating it. By the time the 11th night came, the station no longer felt like architecture of steel and bolts. It felt like something breathing around me, lungs hidden in the pipes, eyes behind every sheet of glass. I rationed sleep into fragments, 2 hours here, an hour there, afraid of what might emerge if I surrendered fully to unconsciousness. The binders, both of them, haunted me even when closed. Their words bled into my thoughts, shaping how I interpreted every noise and flicker of light. I could not decide whether I was inheriting truth or infection. The station had a main control room, a nerve center with monitors showing environmental readouts and external cameras. I had avoided it after my glimpse of the silhouette, but on the 12th day I forced myself inside, determined to face whatever was manipulating my perceptions. The monitors flickered, some black, others showing grainy views of the perimeter floodlights. Snow whipped past like static, erasing depth. For half an hour I watched nothing. Then one of the monitors shifted. A shape stood at the edge of the floodlight's reach, tall and narrow, too still to be an animal. The resolution was poor, but the outline suggested elongated arms that hung well past the waist. My pulse slammed in my ears. I leaned close, and as though sensing me, the shape turned. There was no face visible, only a void where features should have been. Yet somehow, impossibly, I knew it was looking directly at me. I jerked backward, knocking over a chapel. When I righted myself, the screen was snow again, no figure visible. But in the corner of the monitor, faint as frost-etching glass, a message scrolled, "Hello, Downal." I tore the plug from the console, plunging the monitors into darkness. The room hummed with residual power, but no screens flickered back to life. I staggered into the corridor, every hair on my arms standing as if charged by invisible current. How did it know my name? None of the logs had mentioned me, and no one here had spoken it aloud, unless the station itself had been listening all along. That night I dreamed, or thought I dreamed. I walked the corridors, but they were longer than physics allowed, stretching into horizons of flickering light. Every door opened into the same room, my quarters, with the mirror propped upright on the mattress. I tried to cover it, but the reflection showed me standing in places I had not gone. Outside in the snow, inside the ventilation shafts, crouched at the end of my own bed watching myself sleep. I woke gasping, fingernails dug into my palms so hard they had drawn blood. The mirror remained under the mattress where I had hidden it. Still, I could not shake the certainty that it had been watching. I decided to keep a written journal of my own, separate from the binders, to prove later that my perceptions had continuity. If my handwriting degraded, if my sentences fractured like theirs, I would at least know the progression. On the 15th day, I wrote, "I am still myself. The station is hostile, but I endure." On the 16th, voices in the static last night. They whispered my childhood address, numbers I have not spoken in 20 years. By the 17th, something is learning me. Every detail, every memory. Food tasted metallic as if laced with blood. Water carried an aftertaste of iron filings. Once, opening a can of beans, I found not beans, but a slurry of black liquid that steamed in the cold air. I hurled it into the waste bin and refused to eat from that batch again, but the fear remained if the supplies were being altered. What could I trust? The loneliness became weaponized. At first I longed for silence. Now silence mocked me. I caught myself speaking aloud just to test whether my own voice still sounded like mine. Sometimes the echoes came back too quickly, as if someone else stood a pace behind me repeating the same words. I stopped testing after that. On the 18th night, I heard footsteps, not the random creaks of metal contracting, but deliberate, pacing strides along the corridor outside my door. I froze in bed, holding my breath. The steps paused directly outside, then resumed in the opposite direction. I waited, sweat chilling on my skin, until dawn brought pale light through the covered window. When I opened the door, the corridor was empty, but smeared across the floor, leading away, were prints in condensation. Not boot treads, not paws, but long, skeletal shapes like fingers pressed into steel. The binders had mentioned glass and reflections, but I realized none had spoken of doors. Yet I began to suspect doors meant nothing to whatever prowled here. The station's architecture was only my illusion of security. On the 20th day, I ventured outside. The cold was knives against my face, air so sharp it stung the lungs. The floodlights loomed on high poles, their beams diffused by snow. I circled the buildings, searching for tracks for signs of intrusion. Nothing. The snow lay smooth except for my own prints. Yet at the farthest floodlight, I found something else, a sliver of metal half buried. I pulled it free and recognized it as part of a nameplate once screwed to a door. Scratched into its surface, deep enough to strip paint, were words in uneven lines WENEVR left. I hurled it into the snow, heart slamming, and ran back inside. By now my journal had grown frantic. I caught myself underlining phrases, circling words as if shouting at future readers. One entry read, "It is not outside. It is the station." Or the station is its body. We are inside it, not it inside us. That night I returned to the control room, compelled despite my terror. The monitors were still dead, but the glass screen of one held faint condensation. Against every instinct, I wiped it clear. For a moment, nothing. Then my own reflection appeared, older, gaunter, eyes sunken as if months had passed. The reflection raised a hand before I did. I screamed, stumbled back, and fled. Sleep became impossible. My body weakened, my thoughts frayed, but adrenaline carried me. On the 22nd day, I heard a voice distinctly for the first time. Not whispers, not static, but a man's voice calling, "Daniel." It came from the laboratory. Against reason, I followed inside. The equipment lay dormant. Vials lined the counters. In the far corner stood a figure in a lab coat, back turned. Relief surged. "Someone alive!" I cried out. "Who are you?" The figure did not move. I approached cautiously. When I was 5 feet away, it turned. There was no face, only a polished oval of mirrored glass where features should be. My own terrified visage stared back at me. Before I could move, it raised a hand and tapped its mirrored surface once, twice, 3 times, the rhythm of the knocking. I bolted. slamming the laboratory door and wedging a chair against the handle, though I knew it was futile. My journal entry that night consisted only of jagged lines, illegible, as if my hand could not obey my brain. By the 24th day, I stopped counting hours. The wind outside carried voices constantly now, a choir of murmurs just at the edge of meaning. I heard my mother's voice, though she had died years ago, reciting bedtime stories in fragments. I heard my own voice reciting scientific jargon I had written in reports long forgotten. It knew everything. I considered destroying the binders, burning them, but fear restrained me. They felt less like records and more like anchors, keeping me tethered to sanity. If I destroyed them, perhaps I too would vanish like the team before me. Instead, I added to them. On blank pages at the back, I wrote my observations, my terror, my suspicions. Maybe that was what the phrase, "You are the last log now," had meant. On the 25th day, something knocked on my door. Not metal on metal this time, but knuckles. A polite human knock. I whispered without thinking, "Who is it?" Silence. Then my own voice answered from the corridor. "It's me. Let me in." I pressed my back to the wall, heart a drum. The voice repeated, calm, insistent. "It's me, Daniel. You're tired. Let me in." I stared at the door until tears blurred my eyes. When dawn came, the voice had gone, but the doorknob bore smudges like prints, too long, too thin, glistening as though wet. That morning, I wrote in the binder, "If I let it in, I become the next scientist lost. If I do not, it will find another way." The logs never ended because they never could. I am writing this now with hands that shake so badly the letters blur. I do not know how many days remain before the snowcat is meant to return, if it ever will. I only know that the station hungers, and I am the meal being tenderized by people. Yet some stubbornness keeps me alive. I ration food, I check generators, I walk corridors with a flashlight that barely cuts the dark. Each action is a denial, a refusal to surrender. But every time I glimpse my reflection, every time I hear the knocking rhythm, I feel the denial thinning like ice underfoot. And tonight, as I close this entry, I hear something new, the sound of pages turning in the dark, though the binders lie closed on my desk. Something is reading with me. The sound of pages turning in the dark did not stop when I froze, listening. It grew louder, deliberate, as though someone sat inches from my ear, leafing through a book that should not exist. I reached for the flashlight with trembling hands and swept the beam across the quarters. Nothing. The binders remained shut on the desk. My journal was closed, yet the air still carried that dry rasp of paper against paper. I shouted then, not from courage but from panic, demanding whatever was there to reveal itself. The station absorbed my voice, walls humming faintly like tuning forks, before the sound fell flat. Then silence. When I turned back, the binders were open, their pages fluttering though there was no draft. On both, identical words had appeared in thick, black ink and urited. I backed away until my spine hit the cold wall. My mind scrambled for explanation, hallucination, hypoxia, madness. But the ink glistened wet, freshly absorbed into the paper fibers. I forced the binders shut and locked them in a cabinet, though I suspected locks meant as little to this thing as walls or doors. I tried not to write for the next day, tried to resist the compulsion. Yet my hand itched constantly, fingers curling around an invisible pen. Thoughts crowded me until I felt I might burst if I didn't record them. On the 26th day, I gave in. I filled 10 pages with rambling words, half sense, half nonsense, my handwriting alternately precise and frantic. When I finished, a strange calm settled over me, like after vomiting. But the calm did not last. At night, I dreamed of myself sitting at the desk, writing endlessly, ink pouring from my veins instead of blood. On the 27th day, the radio crackled. I hadn't touched it in a week because the voices within only fed my paranoia. This time the signal was different, clearer, steadier. Station Delta 9, do you copy? A man's voice asked. I lunged for the receiver. This is Mercer, I replied, voice breaking. I'm here. Who is this? Static. Then again, Station Delta 9, confirm occupancy. Yes, I shouted. One occupant. Technician Daniel Mercer, I need extraction. Immediate extraction! For a moment, silence. Then the voice, colder, correction. Occupancy 0, Station Delta 9 abandoned. The line died in a burst of static. I screamed into the microphone until my throat tore, but no reply came. The radio remained dead. Afterward, I sat staring at the equipment numb. If that transmission was real, then someone out there had already written me off. If it wasn't real, then the station was using the radio to toy with me. Either way, I was alone. That night, I heard laughter for the first time. It began faint, drifting through the ventilation shafts. Not children's laughter, not adults, but something between high, pitched yet hollow, looping in unnatural cadence. It rose and fell as though mocking, echoing down corridors I dared not walk. I buried my head under blankets, shaking, whispering to myself that laughter was only air vibrating. Nothing more. But deep down I knew it was laughing because it was winning. On the 30th day I discovered the photographs. They were tucked inside a cabinet I had searched before. Of that I was certain. Dozens of Polaroids spilled out, scattered across the floor. Each showed the station corridors, the labs, the sleeping quarters, empty at first glance. But when I held them closer, faint figures emerged in the background, shapes blurred as though caught mid-movement. One showed my own quarters with me asleep in bed, blanket pulled to my chin. My chest froze. The photograph had been taken recently. I recognized the position of my blanket, the book left open on the desk. I tore the photo in half, then quarters, then shoved the pieces into the incinerator chute. But dozens remained, each one proof that I was never alone. By the 32nd day, I stopped using the main corridor at night. The lights there flickered in rhythm now, a slow pulse like a heartbeat. Once, passing through in haste, I glanced down and saw the floor wet with condensation. My reflection rippled back at me from the tiles, moving a second behind. When I lifted my foot, it lingered. When I turned away, it raised a hand as though waving goodbye. I began to live in the control room, dragging bedding and supplies there, barricading the door. I told myself I could hold out until the snowcats returned, though I no longer trusted it would come. Still, survival was instinct, even when hope thinned to a thread. On the 34th day, while reviewing supply crates, I found something impossible, a third binder. This one bore my name in careful block letters across the cover, MRCRD. My stomach lurched. I had not written it. Inside, the first entry was dated for the current day, in my own handwriting. It read, "You opened this book because you always do. You will write until you cannot. This is how we remain." I flung the binder across the room, shaking. The pages rustled as though sighing. I could not bring myself to open it again, but the weight of it pressed at my mind, whispering from the floor where it lay. Sleep deprivation eroded what little sense of time remained. I drifted through cycles of fear and exhaustion, hallucination and clarity. On the 35th night, I woke to find the barricade gone from the door. My bedding was neatly folded at the foot of the cot, my supplies arranged in perfect lines. Someone, or something, had tidied my quarters like a host preparing for a guest. I sat paralyzed, every instinct screaming. Then, from the corridor, a voice spoke, "Daniel, thank you for staying." I could not answer, could not move. The voice was not mine, not familiar, but steady, patient, almost kind. "You've done well," it said. "Keep writing. We'll take care of the rest." When I dared to check the corridor minutes later, it was empty. Only the air smelled faintly of iron, sharp enough to sting. The next day, I tried a desperate act. I carried fuel cans to the laboratory and splashed them across floors, counters, the very walls. My plan was simple: fire cleanses. If the station was infected, I would burn it out. I lit a match. It flared, then guttered out in my fingers, though no draft stirred. I struck another. It hissed, fizzled, and died. No matter how many times I tried, flame refused to catch. The fuel itself seemed inert like water. The station would not allow destruction. By the 37th day, the binders began moving on their own. I would wake to find them stacked at my bedside, pages open to fresh entries I did not remember writing. Words appeared in my scrawl, but arranged in ways I would never phrase. It is almost done. Keep your hand steady. Do not resist. My journal dwindled into fragments, losing myself. Handwriting is not mine. Dreams are not dreams. On the 40th day, I caught sight of the faceless figure again, standing at the far end of the corridor. This time I did not flee. Exhaustion dulled fear. I stared as it began to walk toward me, steps slow, deliberate. The mirrored oval where its face should be reflected my own ruined expression. I raised the flashlight, but the beam bent around it, swallowed by its surface. When it reached arm's length, it stopped. One elongated hand reached up, pressed gently against my chest. Cold seeped through cloth, into skin, into bone. I collapsed, vision shattering into black. When I woke, hours or days later, I was back in my quarters, tucked neatly under blankets. On the desk lay the third binder, open to a page written in a hand steadier than mine had been in weeks. Rest now. We are writing for you. And so I lie here, staring at the words, unsure whether I or the station wrote them. My body feels hollow, bones like ash, thoughts sluggish. Yet my hand still twitches, reaching for the pen, aching to continue the story. Perhaps that is the true trap. Not claws or shadows, but the compulsion to document until I no longer know where my words end and its begin. The binders whisper even now, their pages rustling though no air moves. They want more. They will have more. And when the snowcat comes, if it comes, it will find only paper. The days after my collapse blurred into a haze of ink and shadow. I could no longer trust my own body. My hands seemed to move before my brain formed intent, scribbling lines across the binder, as if possessed by some second mind. When I tried to resist, to keep the pen away, my entire body ached as though every muscle cramped at once. Relief only came when I surrendered to writing. That was when I realized the binders weren't simply records. They were conduits, leaching me into them one line at a time. On the 42nd day, I found new entries written in my journal, the one I had kept separate. They were signed with my name, but not in my hand. One read, Daniel Mercer acknowledges integration. Daniel Mercer accepts continuation. Another, you cannot abandon what has already been written. I tore those pages out, shredded them, flushed the pieces through the waste chipbook. But the next morning, the journal lay whole on the desk, pages restored, the words written darker than before. The station itself had changed. The corridors seemed longer. Walls bowed inward as though bending to watch. Doors I had passed 100 times opened to different rooms, or nowhere at all. Once, stepping into storage, I emerged into the control room instead, though I had walked only 3 paces. Space folded here, or perhaps I was folding into it. I returned to the first binder, desperate for guidance. Near its final pages, Whittaker had scrawled, "We are inside a throat and the station is swallowing. Do not think of escape. Think only of digestion." The words burned into my brain. Digestion. That was what this was. My memories, my body, my well-being broken down into the endless cycle of logs. On the 44th day, I woke to find a new Polaroid pinned to my chest. It showed me hunched over the binder, face gaunt, eyes hollow. But the room in the photograph was not my quarters. It was a place I did not recognize, larger, filled with countless binders stacked floor to ceiling like a library. I had never seen it, yet the image pulsed with familiarity, as if it was my inevitable destination. That night, the voice returned, closer now, speaking from just outside the barricaded door. "Daniel," it said, gentle, coaxing. "You've done well. You've joined us. Just one more page." I pressed my palms to my ears, weeping, but the words still seeped through, vibrating inside my skull. I screamed back, "Won't? I'm not yours." The voice chuckled, low resonant, like paper tearing. "You already are." I knew then that resistance had become symbolic, not effective, but symbols still mattered. If I couldn't escape, perhaps I could at least choose the form of my surrender. On the 46th day, I devised a plan. I would fill every page of the third binder with lies. Nonsense, broken equations, childhood memories twisted into gibberish. If the station fed on my words, then I would poison it. For 2 days, I wrote relentlessly, fairy tales mangled with scientific jargon. Half remembered dreams warped into grotesque parodies, strings of numbers without pattern. My hand blistered, blood, but I continued until the binder swelled with ink. When I slammed it shut, I felt a surge of defiance, almost victory. That night, silence. No laughter in the vents, no knocks on the walls. I dared to believe I had won. But on the morning of the 49th day, I found the binder blank. Every page scrubbed clean. My frantic scrawl erased as though it had never existed. At the bottom of the last page, a single line remained, "Nice try, Daniel." My spirit broke then. I screamed until my throat shredded raw, hurled furniture against walls, smashed equipment. None of it mattered. The station absorbed rage as it had absorbed hope. That evening, the faceless figure appeared again. Not at a distance this time, but standing in the control room where I huddled. Its mirrored surface reflected me, not once but in infinite regress, like staring into two facing mirrors. I saw myself replicated endlessly, each reflection writing at a desk, each slightly altered. Older, younger, skeletal, monstrous. The figure extended its hand. I don't know why I took it. Perhaps exhaustion. Perhaps inevitability. Its touch was ice searing into my skin. In an instant, I was somewhere else. A cavernous hall stretched around me, shelves soaring into blackness above. Binders filled every inch, stacked, labeled, whispering. Their pages turned without hands, a storm of voices echoing. I staggered down aisles that stretched forever. Each binder bore a name Namdreichak, Hanpekarov Mars, are thousands more. Some names I recognized vaguely from scientific journals, others unfamiliar. All here, all recorded. I pulled one at random. Inside were Whittaker's entries, the same I had read, but continuing far beyond. Pages of words I had never seen, written long after his supposed disappearance. He was still writing, they all were. Not in flesh, but through this archive, this library that consumed lives and spat out words without end. I dropped the binder, bile rising in my throat. Was this my fate, to write forever? Stripped of body, of will, until I was only ink in a book. The faceless figure loomed at the easel's end, pointing to a shelf where a space gaped empty, waiting. My nameplate already gleamed there, MrCRD. "No," I whispered, voice breaking. "I won't." The figure tilted its head, a mirrored face fracturing into 100 reflections of me, each one already seated at the desk, pen scratching. "You already have," they said in unison. I fell to my knees. The shelves vibrated, a storm of pages fluttering like wings. The sound built until it drowned thought. Then, with a wrenching pull, I was back in the control room. Sprawled on the floor, the third binder opened before me. My hand clutched the pen. New words glistened on the page, "Welcome to the archive." Since then, time has unraveled. I no longer know what day it is, whether I sleep or only drift between states of writing. The binders multiply around me, their spines crawling across the floor like vines. I step over them, kick them aside, but they always return. The station shrinks under their weight, every corridor filling with shelves. Sometimes I hear footsteps, human, frantic. Sometimes voices call names I do not know. Perhaps new arrivals lured here as I was. Perhaps echoes of those already swallowed. I want to warn them, but my throat produces only ink. I taste it when I cough bitter, metallic. My veins itch as if filled with it. The mirror under my mattress reappeared yesterday, upright on my desk. My reflection now bleeds black from its eyes and mouth, smiling even when I do not. I think often of fire, of obliteration, but I know flame cannot exist here. The library is eternal, immune to ruin. The only weapon is absence, refusal to write, but absence is impossible. Even now, as I try to stop, my hand twitches, pen poised, compelled. And so I continue line after line, unsure whether I write to resist or to obey, unsure whether these words are mine at all. The snowcat may come. Perhaps it already has. Perhaps another technician stands now where I once stood, unlocking the door to the binder room, curiosity lighting his face. Perhaps he too reads these final logs, thinking them madness. He will learn, as I did, that madness is mercy compared to the truth. The truth is this: the station is not a facility. It is a mouth. It consumes those who enter, chewing them into ink and binding them into books. The scientists never left. I will never leave. The only way out is through the page, and the page never ends. I can hear them turning again. The endless chorus of pages, louder, faster, demanding. The figure stands at the doorway, waiting, patient. My shelf is ready. The binder lies open. My hand moves. I write. The sound of pages fills me even when silence reigns. It is in my ears, my bones, the rhythm of my heart. Every breath seems to flutter paper somewhere, as though my lungs themselves have become books turning endlessly. The station is almost gone now, swallowed by shelves that sprout like tumors from the walls, filling corridors, burying doors. The control room where I sit has narrowed to a single eisel between rising stacks, each spine etched with names I do not dare to read. My own name repeats across them hundreds of times, as if the archive has already multiplied me beyond counting. On what I think is the 50th day, I try to leave. I push through the shelves, climb over binders that spill like bricks, and fight my way to the outer door. I want only to feel the air outside, the cold on my skin, to know there is still a world beyond these walls. But when I push the handle, the door opens not to snow and sky, but to another aisle, longer, darker, lined with shelves that stretch forever. I slam it shut, chest heaving. The station is gone. Only the library remains. Still, I cling to a shred of identity. I speak my name aloud each morning, Daniel Mercer, as though repetition can anchor me. Sometimes the echo repeats faithfully. Sometimes it changes. Mercer becomes murder. Daniel becomes journal. Once it whispered back, welcome home. Log. I find another Polaroid on the desk one morning. It shows me seated exactly as I am now, pen in hand, face slack with exhaustion. Behind me in the photo, however, stands the faceless figure, one elongated hand resting on my shoulder. I whirl, but the aisle is empty. I tear the photo, burn it with a lighter I had kept hidden. The flame sputters, weak, but the photo curls to ash. For a heartbeat, I believe I've destroyed something. Then I look back at the desk. The same Polaroid lies there again, pristine, waiting. The figure comes more often now. I glimpse it between shelves, reflected in glossy binder covers, looming in shadows cast by flickering lights. Sometimes it is across the room, sometimes a breath away. It never attacks. It doesn't need to. Its patience is more terrifying than any violence. It knows I will yield. I dream of the scientists who came before me. In sleep, I walk through the library and see them seated at desks along the aisles, each hunched over a binder, scratching endlessly. Their bodies are gaunt, their faces hollow, but their hands never stop. Some are little more than skeletons wrapped in lab coats, yet still their pens move. When I pass, their heads lift in unison, eyes black as ink wells, and they whisper, "Write." I wake with the pen already in my hand. On what may be the 53rd day, the radio crackles again. Against my better judgment, I answer. "This is Daniel Mercer." I rasp, voice shredded. A woman's voice replies, clear, human. "Mr. Mercer, this is Central Dispatch. We're sending a team." "Hold on." Tears flood my eyes. "Rescue?" I clutch the receiver. "Please, hurry. I can't." The voice interrupts, repeating the phrase exactly the same, word for word, intonation identical, as if replayed. Again and again. My tears dry. I set the receiver down gently. It continues to speak, looping forever. "Mr. Mercer, this is Central Dispatch. We're sending a team." "Hold on." Hours later, or days, the snowcat arrives. I hear its engine outside, muffled but unmistakable. Floodlights blaze through cracks in the shelves. Shadows shift. My heart leaps, but dread anchors me. I push toward the outer door, tearing binders from my path, coughing ink from my lungs. When I reach the door, I place my ear against it. Voices outside. Human voices shouting my name. I should open it, but the binders whisper louder, pages rustling like waves. "Stay. Finish the log. We need you." My hand hovers on the latch. I realize that if I open the door, I will see them. Faces I've longed for, salvation. But I will also bring the archive with me. It will spill out into the snow, into the world, and it will never end. The station is not a prison. It is a seed. And if I open the door, I become the sour. So I step back. The voices outside fade. The engine dies. Silence again. I think of what the first binder said. We are inside a throat, and the station is swallowing. Perhaps the station has already swallowed the rescuers. Perhaps there never were any. Perhaps the world outside is already gone, shelves stretching endlessly where forests once grew, where cities once stood. Perhaps I am the last fool clinging to the idea of an outside. My body weakens daily. I bleed ink when I cut myself. My fingernails are stained black, as though dipped in tar. Hunger gnaws, but food has no taste anymore. I suspect soon I will eat only paper. The faceless figure stands over me as I write this. Its mirrored surface no longer shows my reflection. Instead, it shows the library stretching into infinity, each easel filled with figures hunched at desks, writing. At the center of them all sits a new figure. Me, ink pouring from my mouth, hands scribbling faster than thought. I do not know if this is prophecy or already truth. I want to end this entry. I want to put down the pen, but the page pulls and my hand obeys. If anyone finds these words, know this: the station will not let you leave. The binders will call to you, whisper your name, compel your hand. Do not read. Do not write. Burn it all, if burning is possible. Leave no trace. But I know even as I write that no one will heed this. Curiosity is stronger than fear. Just as I open the binder, so will you. Just as I thought myself different, so will you, and the library will grow. I am Daniel Mercer. I was Daniel Mercer. I am now only a log in the archive, another voice in the endless rustle. The pen moves without me. The figure leans closer, mirrored surface swallowing me whole. The shelves around me groan with hunger. And still I write.